Bro cheats and get engaged with my girlfriend. So my dad did this in his will. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind where you never expect anything life-changing to happen. I was sitting at home, scrolling through my phone, when I got a text from a friend. "Hey, I thought you should see this." Attached was a photo of my younger brother Chris, laughing and holding hands with my girlfriend, Emily. They were at a bar downtown, looking far too cozy for two people who were supposed to have nothing but a polite siblings-girlfriend dynamic. At first, I told myself it couldn't be what it looked like. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a weird angle, or an inside joke I wasn't part of. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I confronted Emily that night. She didn't deny it. In fact, she barely had the decency to look ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It just did. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Emily, you've been sneaking around with my brother. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She tried to justify it, saying things like, "We didn't plan this," and "I didn't know how to tell you." But none of it mattered. The betrayal was complete, and there was no coming back from it. The next day, I confronted Chris. He didn't even bother denying it. "Look, man," he said, his tone smug. "I'm sorry, but you weren't right for her. We clicked in a way you never could." His words felt like a punch to the gut. My own brother had not only stolen my girlfriend but had the audacity to act like he'd done me a favor. I cut ties with both of them that day. Emily moved out of my apartment, and I told Chris I never wanted to see him again. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have a brother anymore. But the fallout was just beginning. Word spread quickly among our family and friends. Some tried to stay neutral, saying things like, "It's complicated," or "These things happen." But our father, a man of strong principles, wasn't having it. After cutting ties with Chris and Emily, I thought I could begin to move on, but the betrayal sent shockwaves through my family. It wasn't just about me and Chris anymore. It was about the values we had grown up with and the fractures that now ran through our family. My dad, always a man of integrity, took the news harder than I expected. When I told him what Chris had done, his reaction was immediate and fierce. "He did what?" he bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. I explained everything. The sneaking around, the lies, the complete disregard for family loyalty. My dad sat there in stunned silence for a moment, his face a mix of anger and disappointment. "That boy," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't raise him to be this way." My mom, on the other hand, tried to keep the peace. "Let's not make this worse than it already is," she said, her voice wavering. "They made a mistake, yes, but they're still family." Her words felt like a slap in the face. "A mistake?" I shot back. "This wasn't a mistake, Mom. This was a choice, a series of choices. Chris knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway." My dad agreed. "Your brother crossed a line," he said firmly, "and there are consequences for that." The confrontation with Chris was brutal. My dad called him over to the house for what he described as a family discussion. When Chris arrived, he looked smug, like he thought he could charm his way out of trouble. "What's this about?" he asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. "You know exactly what this is about," my dad replied, his tone icy. "What you did to your brother is unacceptable." Chris shrugged, his nonchalance only fueling my dad's anger. "Look, I'm sorry it happened, but it's not the end of the world. Emily and I are happy, and you all need to get over it." "Get over it?" my dad repeated, his voice rising. "You betrayed your brother, Chris. You don't just get over something like that." Chris rolled his eyes. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like I did it to hurt him." "Whether you meant to or not doesn't matter," my dad said. "You showed a complete lack of respect, not just for your brother, but for this family." The tension in the room was suffocating. Chris tried to argue, but my dad wasn't having it. "If you're so sure about your choices, then you can live with the consequences," he said. "As far as I'm concerned, you're no longer welcome in this house." Chris's jaw dropped. "You're kicking me out of the family?" "You did that yourself," my dad replied. Chris stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My mom burst into tears, torn between her love for her sons and the devastation of seeing her family fall apart. After that day, Chris was effectively disowned. My dad refused to speak to him, and my mom, despite her heartbreak, respected his decision. The once close bond between us as brothers was shattered beyond repair. As for Emily, she became a non-topic. No one in the family wanted to discuss her, and I was more than happy to pretend she didn't exist. But even with Chris out of the picture, the damage was done. Family gatherings felt empty, and the weight of the betrayal lingered like a dark cloud over everything. In the months following the fallout with Chris and Emily, I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. The betrayal had left a scar, not just on me, but on our entire family. I threw myself into work, hoping that keeping busy would distract me from the pain. My dad, despite his stoic exterior, wasn't the same either. The anger he'd shown during the confrontation with Chris had faded, replaced by a quiet sadness. He didn't talk about it much, but I could tell the situation weighed heavily on him. "He's still my son," he admitted one evening as we sat on the porch. "But what he did, it broke something I don't think I can fix." I tried to comfort him, but I didn't have the words. How do you console someone who feels like they've lost their child, even though he's still alive? My mom, ever the mediator, tried to keep the lines of communication open, but even she had to admit that Chris wasn't interested in reconciliation. "He's with her now," she told me during one of our conversations. "They got engaged last week." Hearing that felt like reopening an old wound. Chris and Emily were moving on with their lives, seemingly unaffected by the chaos they'd caused. It wasn't fair, but life rarely is. Then, just as things were starting to settle, we got news that turned our world upside down. My dad, the rock of our family, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The news hit like a freight train. He had always been the strong one, the man who could handle anything life threw at him. But now, he was the one who needed support. I took time off work to be with him as much as possible. We spent hours talking on the porch, reminiscing about better days. He told me stories about his own father, lessons he'd learned, and regrets he carried. "I don't regret standing up for you," he said one evening, his voice weak but steady. "Chris made his choice and I stand by mine. But I do wish things had turned out differently." As his condition worsened, he started making arrangements for his estate. My dad wasn't a wealthy man, but he had worked hard to ensure his family was taken care of. He insisted on discussing the details with me, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. "I need you to understand something," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "This family needs to learn what loyalty means. I've made my decision, and I hope it sends the right message." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I assumed he was talking about leaving the house to my mom, or ensuring his savings went toward her care. It wasn't until after he passed that the full weight of his words became clear. When the day finally came, our family gathered to say goodbye. Even Chris showed up, though his presence was met with icy silence from everyone but my mom. The funeral was small but heartfelt. Friends and relatives shared stories of my dad's kindness, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. But as we mourned his loss, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. After my father's funeral, life felt like it was moving in slow motion. The weight of his absence hung heavy over the family, but the true storm was yet to come. A week after the service, we gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of his will, a moment that would change everything. I wasn't sure what to expect. My dad had always been private about his finances, and while I knew he had worked hard to ensure we were taken care of, I didn't think much beyond that. Chris was there, sitting stiffly in the corner with Emily at his side. She looked uncomfortable, as if she knew her presence was unwelcome. The lawyer, a composed older man with glasses perched on his nose, began by reading a heartfelt letter my dad had written. He spoke about family, loyalty, and the values he had tried to instill in us. "Family is built on trust," the letter read, "and trust is something that must be earned and protected at all costs." Chris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the division of assets. My mom, as expected, was left the house and a portion of his savings to ensure she would be comfortable. But it was the rest of the will that caused jaws to drop. "To my eldest son," the lawyer continued, "I leave the remaining balance of my estate, including the business I built from the ground up, my savings, and all personal possessions of sentimental value." I froze, unable to fully process what I just heard. He had left everything to me. Chris's reaction was immediate. "What the hell?" he blurted out, standing up from his chair. "How is that fair?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Mr. Dad's last name specified that this decision was based on the actions and choices of his sons. He believed that loyalty and integrity should be rewarded. Chris turned to me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is your doing, isn't it?" he demanded. "You convinced him to cut me out." I stood up, my own anger bubbling to the surface. "I didn't convince him of anything," I said. "Your actions did that all on their own. You betrayed me, Chris. You betrayed this family." And Dad made it clear what he thought about that. Emily tried to chime in, but my mom, who had been silent up until this point, raised her hand. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of the room. "Chris, you knew this was coming. You made your choices, and your father made his. Don't blame anyone else for the consequences." Chris looked like he wanted to argue, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He grabbed Emily's hand and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The room was quiet for a long moment after they left. The lawyer handed me a copy of the will and offered his condolences. As I walked out of the office with my mom, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your dad was proud of you," she said. "He wanted you to know that." Her words brought a mix of emotions, gratitude, sadness, and a lingering ache for the father I had lost. I thought the reading of the will would be the end of the drama, but I underestimated Chris. A week after storming out of the lawyer's office, he showed up unannounced at my house. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the backyard trimming the hedges when I heard the sound of a car door slamming. I turned to see Chris walking up the driveway, his face a mix of anger and desperation. "What are you doing here?" I asked, wiping my hands on my work pants. "We need to talk," he said, his tone clipped. I didn't want to let him in, but curiosity, and maybe a bit of closure, got the better of me. I gestured for him to follow me to the porch, where we sat in tense silence for a moment. "You've got some nerve showing up here," I finally said. "I'm here because this whole thing is bullshit," he snapped. "Dad cutting me out of the will? Leaving everything to you? That's not fair, and you know it." I scoffed. "Fair? You want to talk about fair, Chris? What was fair about stealing my girlfriend? What was fair about betraying your own brother?" He flinched but quickly recovered. "I made a mistake, okay? But that doesn't mean I deserve to be disowned. He was my dad too." "Then maybe you should have acted like it," I shot back. Chris shook his head, his frustration boiling over. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to ask you to do the right thing. Split the inheritance with me. It's what Dad would have wanted if he hadn't been so blinded by anger." I stared at him, dumbfounded by his audacity. "Do the right thing?" I repeated. "Chris, the right thing would have been not betraying your family in the first place. Dad made his decision, and I'm not going to go against his wishes just to make you feel better." His jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "You think you're so perfect," he said bitterly. "Like you've never made a mistake in your life. Newsflash, you're not better than me." "This isn't about being better," I replied. "It's about actions and consequences. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the fallout. That's on you, not me." Chris stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the porch. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "If you won't do the right thing, I'll find another way to get what's mine." "Is that a threat?" I asked, standing up as well. "Call it whatever you want," he said, turning to leave. As he walked down the driveway, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. Chris wasn't just my brother. He was someone I had once looked up to, someone I had trusted. Seeing him like this, consumed by bitterness and entitlement, was heartbreaking. Later that evening, I got a call from my mom. "Chris came by to see me," she said, her voice heavy. "He's talking about contesting the will." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Let him try," I said. "Dad was clear about his wishes, and I'm not backing down." She paused for a moment before replying. "I just wish things could have been different," she said softly. "So do I admitted. "But this is where we are now." Chris's threat to contest the will lingered in my mind for days, but as time passed, it became clear that it was just that, a threat. He didn't have a legal leg to stand on. My father's wishes were explicit, and no amount of posturing or bitterness could change that. Still, his actions left a sour taste in my mouth. The brother I had once admired had turned into someone I barely recognized, someone driven by entitlement rather than reflection. As the dust began to settle, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the family fallout, my father's passing. It had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but in the quiet moments, I realized something important. I had come out of it stronger. The business my dad left me became my focus. It wasn't just a livelihood, it was a way to honor his legacy. Every decision I made, every step I took to grow the company, felt like a tribute to the man who had taught me the value of hard work and integrity. I poured myself into it, expanding our services, investing in new equipment, and building a team of dedicated employees who shared my vision. The work was demanding, but it was also fulfilling. Outside of work, I made a conscious effort to rebuild my personal life. The betrayal had made me hesitant to trust others, but I refused to let it harden me. I reconnected with old friends, spent more time with family, and even ventured into the world of dating again. It wasn't easy. Every new connection felt like a risk, a leap of faith. But slowly, I started to let people in again. One evening, while attending a local charity event for small businesses, I met someone who reminded me that not everyone in this world is out to hurt you. Her name was Claire, and she was there representing her nonprofit organization. We struck up a conversation about our shared passion for giving back to the community. She listened intently as I talked about my business and the values my father had instilled in me. Unlike Emily, she didn't brush off my work or treat it as insignificant. She admired it. As the evening went on, we exchanged numbers, and what started as casual conversations turned into something deeper. Claire was everything I hadn't realized I was missing: kind, supportive, and genuine. Over time, she became a steady presence in my life, reminding me that even after heartbreak, it's possible to find love and trust again. Chris, on the other hand, became a distant memory. He and Emily eventually moved away, and though I occasionally heard bits and pieces about their lives through mutual acquaintances, I didn't dwell on it. My mom and I grew closer in the aftermath of everything. She supported my decision to honor my father's wishes and often reminded me how proud he would have been of the life I was building. Looking back, I realized how much the experience had shaped me. It taught me the importance of boundaries, the value of integrity, and the strength it takes to stand up for yourself, even when it means walking away from people you once loved. Now, my life feels full in a way it hasn't in years. I've built a business I'm proud of, surrounded myself with people who genuinely care about me, and found a partner who sees and values me for who I am. Sometimes, life takes you through the fire to show you what truly matters. And for me, that journey has been about more than just surviving. It's been about thriving. Here's to honoring the past, embracing the present, and building a future filled with hope, resilience, and peace.